Hello and welcome to the Esty Show. Today we'll be demystifying corporate language with David Lifson. Who is David, you may ask? David is a chief product officer who formerly worked at Amazon, Etsy, and General Assembly, among other companies. You might remember him from the episode we did back in April on working for a first-time founder. I'll link it in the show notes. Why discuss this topic? Language used in corporate settings differs from everyday speech. Just as sports fans and Gen Z have their own euphemisms and expressions, I understand neither of them. Understanding and reading between the lines of corporate language is critical for surviving and thriving in that environment. For this conversation, I used a list posted by the Instagram account For Good Code and comments on that post, but I've also seen this content shared on LinkedIn and X in one form or another. Who is this episode for? Well, two types of listeners. One, those who are seeking a good laugh. I certainly had many during our conversation. And those wanting to better comprehend the subtext of corporate language. While I expected our conversation to be light and funny, which it was at times, we also ended up getting quite vulnerable as we opened up about mistakes we had made, how to properly handle situations where a direct report presents incorrect information in a meeting in front of others, what kind of questions to ask during job interviews, and which signals to look out for in assessing a company's feedback culture. David is extremely raw and honest as he talks, drawing upon his personal experiences for meetings, getting fired, having to fire others, and comical situations to interpret and further explain different nuances. He's probably one of the best translators from corporate language to English language to have this conversation with. If you're listening to this episode and during the conversation think, hey, there are some key phrases or interpretations that we missed, please let me know. My website is now live, and I'll be sending a personalized video message to anyone who subscribes to my free newsletter this week. You can sign up by going to theestshow.com. As always, I appreciate your feedback, and those subscribes and ratings on Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts, really help. Without further ado, let's speak with David. David Lifson, hello, and welcome back.
Hi, it's good to be here.
You are the first guest on this show who is not a blood relative or my spouse who has been here more than once. So welcome.
Amazing. I'm so lucky.
There's been a lot of information online around the idea that there's real world speak and then there's corporate speak. The language is very different. Not only is it different in corporate and in the quote unquote real world, but it's also different from industry to industry and then from company to company. It can get to a point where it's actually funny. And a lot of people spend a lot of time digesting what does that mean. Be it in an interview process, being like, when they tell you tofu, it's top of funnel. And when they tell you CAC, it's customer acquisition cost, and all of those, not just acronyms, but also words. I wanted to dive into some of the best ones to you, read some of the interpretations we found online, and give our own. What do you think?
I love that. Also, I've literally never heard tofu before, and now I want to use it because it's ridiculous.
It's for vegetarians who work in marketing.
Yes.
That was a joke. Also, just before we go into it, why is there a whole different language and lexicon in the corporate world? Why can't we use things like just say, we want to optimize for increased conversion? Why do we have to use language that no one understands or that people have to relearn?
Yeah, I feel like so in my mind, there's two different types of jargon. So the first are acronyms, and then the second are euphemisms. There's that jargon that's like, oh, we should like ping this person, which is like a weird 1980s like networking word, computer networking word. Or I don't know, we'll like circle back, or we'll double click, or like my old boss updated double clicking on something to double tapping because I guess he wanted to be like mobile first in his jargon. It's like that kind of stuff, which is ridiculous. And then there's all of the acronyms, like you said, where I feel like every new hire needs like that Google Doc that's like 6 pages long of all of the acronyms that people use. That, I don't know, some of it might be shorthand and some of it feels a little bit in like a human behavior, like sociology kind of way, of a way to define kind of in-groups and out-groups. Of like, well, if you know the lingo, you're like part of the team, and then everyone else, like, sorry, you're not one of the cool kids.
Interesting. So you're saying it's a way of weeding out those who don't belong.
Yeah, I think so.
One story that comes to mind, I grew up outside of the United States. English is my first language. That being said, a lot of the expressions I was not aware of growing up. So I take things very literally. And when I hear some people say some stuff, I'm like, I feel like you mean not what you're saying, but I have no idea what you actually mean. And then I also spent a summer in business school between the first year and second year interning for Startup Accelerator in Israel. Most of the startups in Israel, they develop the technology in Israel, but the market there is very small. So then they come to the States to fundraise and to go to market. And they literally had workshops, multiple workshops of like, you think you speak English, but you don't really speak English.
Yeah.
And if someone tells you something's interesting in America, they're not saying it's interesting. They're saying you're an idiot.
That subtext is so real. So I'm half Chinese. And the Chinese language is also like very idiomatic. There's just like lots and lots of phrases where if you take it literally, it just doesn't make any sense. But then what you're...
Do you have an example?
No. I don't. My Chinese isn't good enough to remember something on the spot. I feel like what you're describing is like an extra layer, which is where, here's something that people say in the South. I'm in Austin, Texas, where if someone hasn't seen you in a really long time, they'll say, it's been a minute. And like, no, it hasn't. It's been like years, but for whatever reason, like that's how people say that. I can't imagine for people where English is a second language, it must be just so hard to understand.
Very confusing. So let's start. Expression number 1, let me check with my team.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Usually that means something like, yeah, we really don't want to do this and I just don't want to say no to your face. So I'm going to hope that someone else says no for me.
Yeah, that's an absolute no. Other no's are possibly or it's on our roadmap.
Right. We'll add it to the backlog.
We'll add it to the backlog. So good. This will be done next quarter.
Oh, right. No chance.
No chance. The roadmap will be rewritten. Okay, here's another one. Disagree and commit.
So I actually really care about disagree and commit because I feel like there's a lot of companies who are too nice.
Okay.
And so that it ends up being this very like designed by committee where like we won't do anything until everyone disagrees. Like I actually prefer cultures where people debate it out and all of a sudden like CEO, whoever is the leader gets to like call time, be like, okay, everyone said their piece. This is what we're doing. Everyone else get on board. So I'm a fan of disagree and commit, but how do you feel about it?
I did a whole episode on it. I think if you're the person who's being told to disagree and commit multiple times in a row, it's an equivalent of a PIP and you should look for another opportunity. That being said, I think it's necessary in organizations so that you can make decisions and move forward.
Yeah.
The disagree and commit interpretation that I'm reading is, I hate you.
I think there's definitely a way where like people will use company values or like say with a smile something that is not nice at all.
Do you have an example?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, like in the South, like the most common example, and this is not South in like Texas, but South in like Georgia, of like, oh, bless her heart, which is like always the thing people will say before they say something just devastatingly mean.
What does it mean, bless her heart? Like she's an idiot?
No, like, oh, like she's such a wonderful person, or like it's a nothing phrase that kind of means like, I don't want to be mean, or like they're a nice person, but actually like she's just a wreck or whatever it is.
Okay, per my last email.
Right, that's like I want to scream at you and I can't professionally, so I'm going to do this instead.
Try reading for once in your life. Okay, here's one. Challenging landscape.
Challenging. That's one of those phrases where I feel like it just represents a culture. Remember I talked about how earlier, like some of it is acronyms and some of it's euphemisms. Like that to me describes a culture where that people are afraid to just say what's actually happening. So they have to like couch it in all this language because they don't want to, be the person who's a stick in the mud, to use an idiom. And no, like if challenging landscape to me means like there's no way that's going to work, Like,
okay, so yeah, the definition here is we're going out of business quickly.
Yeah.
The other ones for this could be macroeconomic conditions.
Yeah, we don't have product market fit, but we don't want to hold ourselves accountable, so we're going to blame the Fed.
Yeah, we're going to blame the market for not buying our product because we had the fit, the market changed.
That's right.
Also, to me, it kind of communicates we're never going to take responsibility. We'll just blame everything else in the world. Okay, next term. Digital transformation. My
bias, I'm a startup guy, so like I've never worked at a company where people said that with a straight face, but I feel like it's like Y2K happened 24 years ago. We're still talking about digital transformation. It's just absurd.
So the definition here is we're going out of business slowly.
There's so many industries now where, I mean, I shouldn't say now, still, that require fax machines, especially in healthcare.
The healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah. It's bonkers. Like, what? So, like, they are living in that digital transformation world, and it is hard to fathom.
Even though the alternative they have to faxes are like those really scary portals that it's impossible to log into, where you can upload a document.
Where did we go wrong?
You can never log in. Okay, let's circle back.
This one drives me nuts.
What does it mean?
Well, okay, so there are some company cultures where people are afraid to make a decision because if they make a decision or they take a side, they take a position, they'll get criticized or they feel vulnerable and so they're not willing to. So it's like, okay, we're not going to call the ball. We're just going to circle back to this thing and we'll talk about it again next time. And then they look at their calendars and next time is like, oh, well, the next time we're both free is like 3 weeks from now. And it's just like companies just get bogged down because they're just not willing to make a call.
To quote you from the last episode we did together, is if you want to go on David's nerves, his biggest pet peeve is set up a meeting to redecide something.
Oh my God, thank you for remembering that. Redeciding things drives me insane. Yes, exactly.
David, when I'm editing podcasts, I listen to them like 4 times. So
you got it in there.
The conversations I have. Okay, the definition here, let's circle back, means we'll never speak of this again. But very, very close to what you proposed. 3 weeks later and still no decision will be made. Okay, let's take this offline.
I mean, okay, so there's so many things wrong with this. Obviously, we all meet over Zoom now. Like, what does take it offline mean? But also, how about we just say, like, hey, why don't you and I have a private conversation about this? Because there's things that I want to say that I don't want to say in front of everyone else, And, like, saying, let's take this offline already says all of that to everyone else. So it's not even like you're tricking anyone by like saying the shorter version. It's just insulting.
So the definition here to take it offline is we'll never speak of this again. Also, but one of the commenters commented very similar to what you're saying is I don't want what I'm going to say about this to be on the record.
Exactly.
And if you quote me, I'll deny it.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, you ready? 30,000 foot view.
The bigger picture. Yeah. So I have a friend who I've worked with and hired multiple times where she's known for both saying at the highest level all the time and then at the lowest level. It became a joke at the company. Yeah, suddenly we're all pilots, I guess, and we need to think about different altitudes. Like, there are versions of that as a product leader that's actually really valuable. I mean, not the lingo, but like pulling people out of the weeds and being like, hey, listen, like we're in too deep. We need to like, what's the big picture here? Like that I get. And then there are other times where it's used destructively instead of constructively, where it's a way for people to dismiss what the other person is saying. The other person's making a really important point. And they're like, no. At the big picture, like we got to do this, and like they just sort of wave away the reasons why there's actually an issue.
I think that's very nuanced. The definition here is 30,000 foot view means I don't know what I'm talking about.
Fine.
Have you seen that a lot? When people make introductions or they're asked a question or put into a corner, they just go back to, if you look at it from level X.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot
Then I can go back to something I actually understand.
Yeah, there's a lot of hand waving, especially with topics that are trendy, like whether that was like crypto or now AI or something like that. Yeah, like you actually start to press people on, well, what does it actually mean in like this challenging situation? And they just can't act, like you sort of like catch them naked a little bit.
Okay. The next one, I think most recently has been one of my favorites. We use AI.
Yeah. So my very first PM job in 2007 was PMing the Amazon recommendations team. And we didn't call it AI then because it was machine learning. It was collaborative filtering. But now any algorithm is suddenly AI. It's really jumped the shark and become something that it means everything to people and absolutely nothing in reality in a lot of cases.
Yeah. The definition here for we use AI is we don't use AI.
Right.
I swear, people I have worked with for 3-4 years who didn't know anything, like they didn't even use ChatGPT when it came out. Suddenly I'm looking at their LinkedIn profile and wow, they are an AI technology leader. And I'm like, no, you're not. What is this?
It reminds me of how people will insert the word strategic into a sentence to make it sound more important, and like it's actually not strategic at all.
Oh my God. Okay, so it's similar to people using a British accent.
It just adds credibility.
They can be saying this exactly. They could be saying the weirdest stuff in the world, but since it's with a British accent, you're like, this person must be smart. They must know what they're talking about.
Right, exactly.
So I feel like there's also in the jargon, people hide behind it or hide bad ideas behind it because they're using all the right terms.
That's right. I think that's a really important, just more serious point, is how people can use jargon to cover up for their insecurities.
So tell me about that.
Well, so on the one hand, I feel like everyone, myself included, will have moments where we feel imposter syndrome. And we can try to use language and vocabulary to hope that no one will notice. You know, a little bit of like fake it till you make it. And then I think there are other cases where instead of admitting I don't understand or I don't know, they try to make the other person feel like they don't understand and they don't know. And that's kind of toxic.
Yeah, that sounds like a toxic boss.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Making people feel like morons. Same one for we use machine learning. We do not use machine learning. Not present in this list, but it is probably one of the largest pet peeves of mine. We are a data-driven organization.
Oh, right. You know at the end of the day that, like, what's that Shakespeare line? Like, doth protest too much. It's like, if you're saying you are, chances are the CEO probably is one of those people where it's like, well, this is what I want to do and everyone else is wrong.
Yeah, my conclusion is if you're saying you're a data-driven organization more than once in a conversation, not only are you not a data-driven organization, you don't even have data. You have no idea.
Yeah. This is making me think of something else. This is like not exactly a lingo thing, but like, have you ever met people who describe themselves as humble? Like no actual
Oh my God,
humble.
no, I've never met.
Oh, okay, so like no one who's actually humble will ever say that, but like the people who wish that they were, but they're really just ego-driven people are like, oh, well, you know, like humility is like really important to me. And like, I really care a lot about being humble.
I am the most humble person in the room.
I mean, like you've never met anyone more humble than me.
No, clearly not. No, have you met anyone who does that?
I have, yeah.
You have?
I have, yeah.
They literally talk about how humble they are.
It's a strength of theirs. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. No, I feel like if people are saying that on a team what's important to them is humility,
yeah,
I feel like what they mean is everyone else around them needs to be humble, but not them.
Yeah.
Okay, all hands on deck.
Yep. Okay, so, God, this could mean so many things. So, like, literally, it's like, well, we're all going to have to be working nights and weekends because we need the help. But usually it means, like, leadership screwed up somewhere and doesn't want to admit it. And now everyone who's an IC is paying for it. We had the wrong strategy. We, like, didn't hit our numbers because we didn't have product market fit, but we thought we did and spent all our money on marketing or, like, whatever it is. It's really a tough situation.
I like it. I actually like your definition more than the one here. Here it's let's actually try for once, please. But yours is we screwed up. Now please help us clean up.
Yeah. You know how often it's like, and this is both something that I've been on both sides of this, where the exec team screwed up. They had bad strategy, bad execution, whatever it was. And then they had to do layoffs. And the people who get laid off are not the executives. It's all the people under them who don't deserve that to happen to them. And I don't know. I wish that, and this is coming as someone who I have both laid people off and been laid off myself. There's not enough accountability, I think, at the executive level for failure.
What does accountability look like in such a scenario?
Well, so one is at a human level, I feel like the executive team should do more to just own that they messed up. We got it wrong. It's not your fault. You guys were just doing your best and following sort of the OKRs that we set out. We had the wrong OKRs or whatever it is. I think executives
It wasn't market conditions.
No, exactly. It wasn't marketing. You know, at the 30,000 foot level, we messed up. But also, and maybe the job market is starting to sort this out a little bit, but, and I say this as someone who's been fired a couple times, I think that there's still too many cases where executives are getting hired despite not having really great track records. They just sort of like, I don't know.
Failing up.
Yes, exactly.
Executives get hired with bad track records. And I feel like the companies propagate. So you see a person from a bad company or a company that failed in a big way, like a big miss. Executives getting fired from there, getting hired into the next company and messing up the next company and the next company. And it's like, who is looking at this?
Yeah.
Who is making those decisions?
Yeah. I mean, even to the point where like they did things that might be criminal, you know, and like they just go on and do the next company. There's still this like Silicon Valley, like, boys club thing that's going on. And it's just like really, it's unfair.
And I feel like I would add girls to that boys club as well, because I've seen plenty of horrible female leaders as well. I've seen a lot of great ones, but unfortunately, good leadership doesn't discriminate by gender. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, let's go into this a minute. Like, you've been fired a lot. I've been fired more than I would have liked to. And with this part in my life, I decided to take a little bit of a different approach, because for the last few roles, I felt like there was this cycle of violence where I was going into jobs that were reaching out to me and that wanted to hire me. And taking a step back, for people reaching out to me on LinkedIn, what kind of information do they have about me? The only information they have about me is the company I worked for. And the company I worked for is clearly problematic. A Google search will show that. And if you think because of that experience, I'll be a good fit for your company, that in itself should be a red flag. And I feel like for me, having gone through a number of these opportunities, I decided I had the experience where a recruiter reached out and I spoke with the person who I would be reporting to. I really hate to say this, but it felt like a toxic relationship when you're dating, where it's so familiar. You know how to navigate those relationships. Like, it's comfortable. It's like, I could do this job, but I also know I'm going to be miserable and this is going to be more of the same and it's not going to end well. So for me, at this point in my life, is an attempt to break out of that cycle. And, you know, this podcast is part of it. It's like, who am I outside of those jobs? And going after businesses that aren't interested in me necessarily and saying, hey, despite this experience, I want to be more like so-and-so company and I want to contribute to you.
Yeah, wow. You know, on the one hand, I feel like you don't need anyone to defend you, but I just want to say on your behalf that the work you're doing on this podcast and creating content, I think it's a way to define you in broader terms than just your resume. And I think that that's really important. It's like part of that bigger picture. Because I agree, just because someone works for a company that itself was a shitty company, that shouldn't tarnish who you are in the job market. And I think that the more dimensions of yourself that you are showing off, I think is a big part of adding to that story. Yeah, so like at General Assembly, I was there for 2.5 years, you know, employee 25, I left when it was 350, but like I kind of got pushed out. And, you know, I left on my own accord, on my own timeline. But I think what I learned from that was I got too downward focused, you know, and I wasn't thinking enough about sort of my peers on the executive team and like how could product be helping them. It was just all like, what do we need to build next? Because that's the mindset we had when we were Series A. And now that we were a couple rounds later, that no longer was the right mindset. And I didn't catch that because I was like just too early in my career. And then the other two cases where I actually did get fired, you know, one of them was just like founder fit where we lost product market fit and he didn't agree and like whatever that happens. And then the other time was more about
it should be called product founder fit.
Yes, exactly. You know, in the other case, I think that I was just like being too optimistic about timelines and not willing. I was like scared to share bad news because I was like taking it on myself instead of being like, hey, we all are sharing together in this execution problem. How do we want to solve it together? It was like, oh, it's going to make me look bad. So I'm just going to like hope that the best case scenario happens. And so I did feel like I hit this ceiling in my career where I was like, I've been sort of leading product teams or been a founder for the last 8 years. I've been learning on the job. I've been learning through failing, learning by doing. And I think I've hit a ceiling. And so I now need to find my next job is going to be with someone who's better at product than I am so that I can learn from that person and like keep that going. And I found that at the Knot and was there for 4.5 years and it was amazing. But I just feel like we all hit those points where maybe some of it we were going to learn through doing and some of it we're going to learn through a mentor. And I think that's a good thing.
That was very deep for an episode that's supposed to be very comedic.
Can't help it.
But number one, I want to commend you for speaking about your experience. I feel like a lot of people like to couch their firings and pretend like they never happen. And I hate to say this, but especially for people working in the startup world, it is so normal. You're working with really difficult personalities, really tight budgets, a lot of outlandish ideas. I would say the times when you're not fired, it's a miracle rather than the other way around. The same way when a startup succeeds, it's a miracle. It's 5% of startups that actually make it.
It's true. One last thing I want to say about your experience. There is a career path, which I think you do not want, but you'd probably be really qualified for, which is the head of product to a founder who's a bad person. who like doesn't understand product, or they're super top down command and control, or toxic in some other way, and like the board knows, or whoever knows that person needs a number two who can like help contain the chaos or like turn it into something constructive. And like that's a real skill set that I think is worth a lot. But the like constitution that someone needs to have to choose that career path is one that I don't have.
The keywords to look for in a job to figure out if that's what it is would be fast-paced environment. This role needs a lot of finesse. What other terms can be thrown in for this is a shit show of a job?
Oh, yeah, like a heavily collaborative, relationship with the CEO. I remember reading one once where it was like, they even like wrote this in the job description, so they were kind of upfront about it, I guess, where like they expected the company to work 6 days a week, not 5. Or another one was like, and this wasn't explicit, but I had a job interview with a CEO and it was like 8 o'clock at night, their time.
No.
And it's like,
no.
Oh, okay, so this is what it's like, huh?
Yeah. I interviewed for one job on a Sunday.
Wow.
And then it was actually kind of great because, the CEO was completely focused on the conversation, but it was a Sunday and the CEO was at their child's wedding abroad. I guess that could only be one up that taking a call from their own wedding.
Wow.
And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to? Yeah.
No boundaries. No boundaries. Yeah. That if you got that job, they're texting you at 3 a.m. like on weekends.
Yeah. Okay. There are a few more that I thought are really funny. I hope you are well.
No, you don't.
Let me say something nice before I ask you for a favor.
That's right.
Oh, this is a good one. You'll also see this in like culture statements. CEOs will like to say this one. We're a family.
Oh no. That's the lie that founders will tell themselves. Because like, you know how founders will be like, oh, well, I'm so invested, so all of you should be so invested too, right? Except like they're ignoring the fact that they own 50% of the company and everyone else owns like whatever, a fraction of 1%. And so, yeah, they have
Minor
this like,
detail.
They have this delusion that we're all a family, but when times get tough and they have to lay people off, like they are no longer a family. And it's just like, oh, well, a business...
You're excommunicated.
Right, like a business decision has been
You're
made.
excommunicated and your inheritance is cut off.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, we don't know you.
So this person writes, we're a family means no one gets along and a few people drink. Okay, yeah, this one we discussed. Fast-paced environment is we will work you to the bone.
Got to be careful with those, yeah.
Oh, okay, this one is a good one. We have a transparent feedback culture.
Ooh, I feel like that can go both ways. So sometimes they say that when they mean the exact opposite, and sometimes they mean it and it's like kind of mean. What's
we only want to hear how great we are.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So in that case,
for your real opinion.
Right, it's like they mean the opposite. I feel like
as we're talking, something that's crossing my mind is like very often the things that people or companies will say in the interviews, they actually mean the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a signal that a company is really open to feedback? This is also something you brought up in our previous conversation.
So like,
where you said like at Bowie.
I would think about a few things. So like you can't like directly ask the question because you won't get an honest answer necessarily. So for me, like I said this last time, but I'll say it again, like having a culture where people are hypothesis-based is so important. So they will frequently say things like, I thought I was right and it turned out I was wrong. Or here's what I think, but who knows, I could be wrong about that. Another thing to do is to ask about feedback. So for example, like what do performance reviews look like? Or one thing that I would ask during...
And what kind of answers do you want to be looking for?
Exactly, what kind of answers do you want to be looking for? Yes. Or even you can ask during an interview, how often do you give feedback or how do you give feedback? So one thing, this is a little bit of a style question, but like, let's say you're in some meeting and the CEO is in a team meeting and the CEO is unhappy with some part of the presentation. They didn't like the content or they didn't like whatever it was. How do they give that feedback and when do they give the feedback? Do they say it in the meeting in front of everyone? Or do they wait until after the meeting and they pull someone aside and have a one-on-one conversation? Right, we'll take it offline. Or does nothing get said? And then all of a sudden at performance review time, your review says, well, the executive team doesn't have a lot of confidence in you. And it's like 3 months later. So there's a lot of different ways in which that can come out. And some is much worse than others.
Wow. Let's just play through this scenario because I literally have flashbacks
to
the meetings. What's the ideal scenario. I could tell you what I think and you correct me. But let's say someone presented and messed up. Some of the numbers they're presenting clearly don't add up or don't make sense or weren't thought through or piece of the logic is missing. If I were CEO in that position or managing that person, to say like, okay, let's put a pin in it. Okay, let's move on to the next slide and not dwell on that in the presentation because it's not helping the conversation the way it should be. And then afterwards would sit down one-on-one and say, here's what was missing and here's how to improve it next time. And I would probably, like if I were managing that person, that would be a miss that it went, let's say, to presenting to people who are more senior than me without me catching this. So to make sure there's a process in place. Like one thing when I was working at Estee Lauder and Melanie was my boss, I remember I messed up. Like there was a scorecard I prepared and one of the numbers, there was an extra 0. So it really messed up all of the numbers. And I was mortified. I was ready to like have the floor swallow me. And Melanie told me those things happen. My job is to protect you. Jessica will protect me. Marjorie will protect her. That's how this works. And I thought that was a novel concept. And I think if people feel like, hey, your manager is there to guide you and to protect you and to make sure you're enabled to do the job you need to do, that's very powerful. Eric was that type of boss for me as well, where I just felt like I had someone to protect rather than like if they would have exploded in the meeting themselves and said, hey, this is horrible. How could you do it? First of all, like I, as a manager of a person who's presenting with a gap, have responsibility myself that I need to own. It's also my fault that this person is presenting this way. And you don't want to embarrass someone. What's the point of doing that in front of other people?
Yeah.
And obviously the most toxic thing is to not give any feedback at all.
Absolutely. That's definitely the worst, this sort of like passive aggressive surprise. There's 2 different tracks that I think about. So the first track is, since this is a team meeting, there's probably other people in the room who are having the same thought as you are. And it would be a mistake to like say nothing because people are always looking to us for like what's culturally, like what's the behavior that we want to model. And so if the behavior you model is that like someone says something completely wrong and no one says anything, that will perpetuate. So we do need to like have those norms acted out, but in a way that, like you said, it's like, hey, this doesn't quite feel right, but why don't we talk about it later and move on? And so it's respectful, but it makes the note. And then afterwards, there's 2 pieces to it. So one is around like correcting the actual issue. And I agree, there's some coaching involved or like, hey, it seems like you didn't understand that part. Here's how I think about it. But there's a second piece, which is also giving them feedback about what your expectations were and how they missed on those expectations and what it would look like if they met those expectations. Because that's a way to sort of coach them on their career path, you know, over sort of that longer storyline of their career growth, as in addition to, hey, we got to fix this problem and here's where I see it being a problem.
Very interesting. My question is, you're interviewing for a role. You're trying to assess a company. Are they going to set you up for success or are they going to backstab you? When you ask them, and the question you gave, I think is a great question to ask. How often do you give feedback? How do you give feedback? How do people receive feedback? But then they're not going to start telling you about the situation in the boardroom. So what kind of answers are you looking for that would signal this is the right direction versus this is the wrong direction?
It's a very soft skills analysis question where like whatever their response is, what I'm trying to read into it is the combination of empathy. We don't embarrass people. We don't yell at them. We don't have that sort of culture of like everyone should be scared to make a mistake because if you get caught, you get punished. But also, I do want the other side of it, which is we do hold people accountable. We're clear about the expectations, and when people miss them, we let them know. Because there are also some companies who are scared to fire poor performers. They just sort of like shove them into a corner or move them to a different team. And I don't want to join a company like that.
Definitely not that team. There's another really good one here. We're looking for a fast learner. What does that mean?
We're looking for a fast learner. I would put that as we're about to throw so much stuff at you and you're going to get absolutely no help. So good luck.
Very good. The definition is absolutely no training.
Yeah. You know, there's just to talk about this one.
Also a self-starter.
Exactly. Just to talk about this a little bit, because I think there's a lot of people who, especially people who want to get into product management. And so they want to join as an APM or join as sort of like a junior product manager. And my advice to those people are do not join a company that has fewer than at least 5 product managers, but probably even better would be at least 20 product managers, because anything less than that, no one on that team has time to help you figure stuff out that is just like really entry level stuff. And it's going to be, I mean, some people love the sink or swim experience. And like, if you're one of those people, like that's awesome. I'm jealous. But for a lot of people, there is such thing as going too early and having a really tough time.
I think that's very good advice. I'm thinking of people who I'm working with who are looking, that's literally advice for them. Self-starter.
Self-starter usually means you have a bad manager who's just never going to talk to you and you're like totally on your own. Good luck.
Yeah, that's another one they should put into the job description. The definition here is self-starter. Nobody has a clue what the job entails, and there's no training. The last person quit and walked out.
Yeah, good luck. Figure it out.
Let's do one more. When someone responds, noted.
Oh my God. It's like, it's so condescending. It's like, noted is either like, I'm reading the words that you're writing, but I don't agree with you. You haven't convinced me. Or, yeah, no kidding. You know, there's like a couple different ways to read it. How do you read it?
Whatever.
Yeah.
You define it the way you did.
Come on.
Yeah. Don't want to share my actual thoughts. Don't want to ignore you. So I'll just acknowledge that I heard you. It's like a lot of fluff language. We're saying one thing, we really mean something else. Is it helpful to understand it? Or is it just comedic relief, laughing at how people cover up their insecurities?
I think it's helpful to understand in the way that I think we can all be better communicators if we better understand the communication styles of the other person. Again, this is my startup guy person coming through, but like sometimes it's nice just to be able to be like, hey, based on the last several interactions that we've had, something's going on. Can we talk about it? You know, and just like having that tougher, more like real talk conversation. I think that can be helpful. And then on a less intense, maybe vulnerable note, if people are saying no to you without saying no to you, like as a product manager, you kind of need to know when that's happening so that you can know when to escalate or that there's like, you got a problem here, you got to work through. If you don't catch it now, it's going to show up 6 months from now when like you're presenting the big reveal to the executive team and some jerk in marketing is like, we never agreed to that, you know? So there's both like a tactical survival, how to get things done piece and then a relational piece as well. Do we have time for like one more?
Yeah.
This is one that my wife shared with me, which is about when people say, well, we really have a lot of conviction about that. And then you dig into what they mean by we have conviction, and really they have no data. It's all just like, well, we think we're right, and we're going to do it anyway. We don't care what anyone says, so don't try us, you know? And it's like, I'm going to go out on a limb, but like stupid masculine energy, in my opinion. And I hope people get called out for it every time it happens.
You know, I had a story. I was sitting with two executives. This was also on your list of things founders do. One executive was saying, we did this in the past and it was amazing. It worked. So we should do it again. So my question was, when you say it worked, what do you mean? And the other executive looked at me and was like, let's not doubt the other person when they say it was successful. Like, let's be nice. I was like, no, I was literally just trying to understand what kind of evidence there was and like, what's the definition of success? And instead, this is turning into an aggressive, like, you're doubting each other.
Wow. Yeah. Don't question the king.
Yeah. Don't question the king.
One of these days, we should do an episode on bad managers. And both like, what do bad managers do? But also like, how do bad managers become managers? Like, how did they even get that far? Like, there's just something very broken about the system. It's not like 90% of managers are good and 10% are bad. Like, there's a lot out there. And like, why is that? It's something I think about a lot.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Again.
Yes, I would love to be back. Thank you.
If you've gotten this far, thank you for listening to another one of my episodes. Remember to follow the SD Show on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you have any feedback, questions, or just want to share your own experiences, don't be shy. Hit me up on LinkedIn or email. That's sd.podcast@gmail.com. I'm all ears. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop learning.